WDB, its staff, or management.
Welcome to Common Sense with your host, John Federico.
We don't need no education.
John will be taking your calls at 610-664-4100 to discuss headline issues that affect you, your family, and your community.
We don't need no thought control.
Call John at 610-664-4100 to sound off on topics and events that are important to you.
No dark sarcasm in the classroom.
Now, here's the host of Common Sense, John Federico.
Good morning. This is John Federico, and you're listening to Common Sense. The number of the station here, 610-664-4100, if you care to call in with your comments or suggestions. I don't normally do today's news stories, but I thought I'd talk about a couple things that are going around in the news because they kind of make the point for me that I've been trying to discuss about our political situation. One of the news stories, of course, involves the oil slick out in off the Louisiana shores. And the one thing that's most striking isn't just that the oil company, British Petroleum, gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to both parties, including almost $1 million to the president, and further that he signed off, or his department, the administration's department, signed off on waivers allowing them to not only to drill, but not to have some safety precautions that they should have had. But further, it's learned now, and I read this in the New York Times, that the Office of, I guess it's the Mineral Services, or that's supposed to sign off on these permits, that the oil industry actually fills out the permits for them in pencil, and the government officials basically write over it in pen, so the lazy bureaucrat doesn't have to do anything. And then they were talked later in the article about how these gentlemen received gifts. It seems a little inappropriate, and I hope that someone's going to examine it. But unfortunately, examine it might point fingers in the direction that the administration doesn't want, which is back to the politician. I'm very concerned about the environment. I think we all should be, and I don't entirely fault British Petroleum here. I fault our administration. And further, if we really have the ecological consequences that looks like we're going to have, I don't see why the president's sitting down on this issue. Why isn't he marshaling the resources the United States has, regardless of who pays for the bill? Let's get the darn thing cleaned up. I mean, he's sitting on his butt, and this oil is going all over the place. So they blamed Bush a lot, and I think rightfully so in some cases, for his efforts in Katrina at solving the hurricane problem they had there at New Orleans. But by the same token, I don't see Barack Obama doing anything. I mean, obviously doesn't know much, but talk to people. He doesn't know a lot, so talk to people that know something and get the job done. I mean, certainly there are ways of doing it. There was a story out yesterday about an oil spill off the coast of Saudi Arabia a number of years ago, many times larger apparently than the spill off the coast right now of Louisiana, and they cleaned it up with super tankers. And maybe you need to rent these super tankers or ask a favor to get the super tankers there, but let's do something and clean the mess up instead of just watching it and talking, because that's all he seems to know how to do is talk. Anyway, talking's for radio, not for administration officials. In fact, another interesting thing in the news, I'm sure you're aware of this, is that Mr. Sestak apparently, during his primary run, made a claim that the administration offered him a job not to run for office. And that's one more thing about politics. Now, in politics, what's sickening is that as long as it's not quid pro quo, it's pretty much okay. If I give $1 million to a politician because I like him and he votes for my legislation because he likes me or likes the legislation, then everything's okay, hunky-dory. That's the way they like to keep it. But when you actually give $1 million to a politician to vote for your legislation, that's called bribery, and that's against the law. Well, apparently, you can offer a seat to somebody because you think he's qualified, or offer a position in your government, and you should be allowed to do something like that. But when you offer it and you say, I'm going to give this to you if you don't run, so you won't run, sounds a little quid pro quo to me. And the president, just like on his, and I don't really care where the guy was born, but I mean, just like with the birth certificate, I mean, just for God's sakes, come out and say what happened. Let's get on with it. Not just no comment, no comment, no comment, and have CNN and MSNBC just bury the story the best they can, because that seems to be what's happening. Thank God we do have news organizations like Fox like the Drudge Report, that are able to bring these things to light. Of course, the administration is not going to answer the questions. It's very simple. Come out, tell us what happened. Maybe even the problem is that someone in your administration spoke without your authority. Whatever it is, let's hear it and let's get it over with and move on. So there are two stories that are in the news. Actually, and the funny part, of course, if you want to read this in the New York Times today, you would have to go to page A18. It's not on the front page because New York Times, I don't know who owns the New York Times. I should know this, I guess, but probably the same outfit that runs, MSNBC. I don't know. But they put it on page A18. It seems to me if it were George Bush, this would be front page news. I'm not a George Bush fan, but this stuff should be taken care of. It's a serious issue, and we should find out exactly what happened. Because if you're influencing politicians by offering them jobs, it's just as bad as offering them money, which I think they do in Chicago. That's pretty much the way things are done anyway, I understand. So there are some stories that are in the news today. I don't think we can solve them today, but this program has been mostly focused on not necessarily current events, but current events as they relate to historical events and the way that we have to not just change the results we don't like, but change the system so that we get better results. You see, I don't expect a lot from politicians that are products of parties like the ones that are in office today, whether they're Republican or Democrat. I don't expect a lot from those guys. I mean, they basically sell their souls to get their office, and God knows what they do to keep their office. So that seems to be my biggest problem. And it isn't that I'm upset with private industry. It isn't that I'm upset with the result. I am upset with the results sometimes. It's more that I think we need a better system that gets us better results instead of, in 2000 when people weren't happy because of the way Bush was elected, they wanted to go change they didn't like the result. They were upset with the result. Let's fight the result. It was the process that produced George Bush. And, what were your choices? You had Gore versus Bush. I mean, God, that's like a nightmare waiting to happen either way. And then, it hasn't gotten any better since then. I mean, last year we had, or 2008, we had McCain versus Obama. And I can't imagine that's any of those guys or anybody's dream tickets. So let's invent a system that's a little better that actually allows us to vote for people that we like instead of against people that we don't like. I guess people were rah-rah about Obama. They thought he would be different and so forth. Anybody with a brain would have figured out what he was before he got elected. But that's as Thomas Paine said, I think it was Thomas Paine, that time will make more converts than reason. So what you can't reason with somebody today, just wait, you'll see, and then you'll understand everything. And I think we're starting to understand. So how does government pull the wool over people's eyes continuously? How does government get away with doing the things that it does? That's a big question. I mean, if we're going to stop government from doing the things that it does and for being as almost criminal as they are, how do we stop them? How do they do what they're doing so we can stop them? Well, I identified two main ways that government forwards their agenda to move forward without the will of the people, to disregard the will of the people, to gain power when no one's paying attention. And they do it in two ways that I could identify. Now, maybe a caller could call in with more ways, but the first way they did it, is by setting precedent. And what they do when I say setting precedent, if you want to look at, let's look at the situation with the bailouts recently, not so recently now. How do they come about to have the power to do such things, to take public money, strictly public money, and provide it to private companies? It's kind of a strange situation. Well, you look back and you say there's a history to this. That's what a precedent is. It's something that precedes. Back apparently in 1970, the Penn Central Railroad was bailed out by the United States, and they actually created a quasi-private public entity out of it. But they spent $3.2 billion, and their justification was that the rail service was fundamental to the safety and security of the country, for military reasons and for commerce. So they had to keep them in business, and it was $3.2 billion, which was an astonishing figure. The following year, because they liked what they had done with the railroad, Lockheed Martin basically petitioned Congress to provide an emergency loan guarantee of $1.4 billion, because Lockheed, now again, they're a defense contractor. In some cases, our defense contractors are single source. They're the only one that provides certain armaments. We were already at war in Vietnam at that point, so I don't know what the argument was, but they eventually passed it, and $1.4 billion went out to help Lockheed Martin. And then Franklin National Bank in 1974, it was probably the first official bank bailout of this era. And the Federal Reserve actually stepped in with a loan of $1.75 billion. The total cost to taxpayers over the whole thing was about $7.8 billion. So you see where they did this. They've done it before. They did it for emergency reasons, and so they set a precedent. I don't know if there's any powers in the Constitution to do this other than the welfare clause, the general welfare clause. But 75, they bail out New York City. Now, that's a good one because we're going to see a lot of that in the future. One way or the other, we're going to see a lot of the federal government needing to come in and bail out states and cities. There's just no other way that these cities that have been so absolutely horrible in their planning, disastrously, I mean, they run them so poorly, they tax so heavily, and they spend so unwisely that our cities are going to run into big problems. The West Coast is going to be, I mean, if it basically the whole thing should go bankrupt, but they're not going to go bankrupt because they're going to appeal to the federal government. New York City set a precedent in 1975, at least in this era. I didn't go back any further than in the recent history, but New York City in 1975 got a $9.4 billion bailout by the Ford administration. So you see it's Republicans and Democrats, although, I never made any pretenses that the Republicans were much better than the Democrats. Then all of you remember in 1980, I thought it was 79, but when I looked it up, it was 1980, that Chrysler received a bailout of $4.0 billion. So they kind of set the precedence. You see what happened here is we've done bailouts before. Roll forward past a few more bailouts, and you come to the savings and loan bailouts of 1989. At that point, George H.W. Bush signed and Congress enacted the Financial Institution Reform and Recovery Act of 1989, and they spent $293 billion bailing out the savings and loan industry. Now, bailing out banks in a sensible way, it makes, I could see them providing for that. Bailing them out where the bank basically goes into some sort of receivership, the assets are divided up like a bankruptcy, but to keep the liquidity flowing. Some mechanism could have been provided for. I understand that. It does make sense because you do want to keep a vibrant banking sector. I'm much more in favor of letting them fail and their assets be divided because there are plenty of banks in the country. But, I understand an argument for keeping existing banks in or keeping the programs in existence that would allow banks to continue because the banks do have a relationship with the government through their ability to lend. I don't understand exactly what they did with TARP because they didn't exactly let them go under. They didn't exactly lend them the money per se. They didn't exactly get equity shares. It sounds like in most cases, they guaranteed really bad loans and took extremely bad loans off the bank's books. But the bank was able to get this accomplished without really paying much for it. In fact, article after article that I've read in Financial Times has suggested that if the banks actually had to pay the amount of money it would take to back up the loans that they took off their books, none of them could have afforded it. Citibank would have gone under. A number of them would have gone under. So the government and the administration are going to take a lot of credit for how much money they're going to get back on this TARP. But you have to remember, if you were a player and you had $750 or billion or $1 trillion sitting around, and there was an economic catastrophe, and you had any brains whatsoever, you would make a fortune on that catastrophe. So the government getting repaid handsomely is not a big surprise. What they're doing is they're wiping out the value of your currency, but they're going to get paid back handsomely, and they're going to brag about how they got paid back and how it was such a success. And you're not going to know the details. And as long as things move on, no one cares. And that's what they're banking on. They're banking on the short memory of the American people. So, that's how they do it. That's one way they get in is by setting precedent. The second way that the government encroaches on, basically grows its power or encroaches on our freedoms is through what I call stealth. And stealth is where they draft a piece of legislation. Like let's use an example, a piece of legislation like the Health Care Reform Act. And it's 2,700 pages, and 3 pages deal with health care, and the other 2,697 pages are stealth amendments that are giving more power to the government. I'm making a joke here. I'm sure there are more than 3 pages that deal with the health care, but certainly they've added a lot of power to their arsenal. They created a lot more power for the IRS. They've hired IRS agents. I think they gave money. At one point, they're giving money to Acorn They paid off a couple states. A lot of stuff happened in those bills, and you don't see it all, or you do see it for a moment, and it's passed and it's moved, and then they figure you're going to forget about it when it has long-lasting impact, long beyond when it's been passed. So stealth is another manner that they do this. They lump a lot of bills on. The most common form of stealth, of course, is used to talk about pork barrel and earmarking and all that stuff, but it's a lot worse than that. They also give themselves a lot more power, and they cause a lot more pain usually for the American taxpayer or the American citizen down the road. One of the things, and I'm going to go to a break shortly, is that in the this affects every small business in the country. One of the stealth measures that was enacted as part of the health legislation empowers, it forces all small companies, any small company, to provide 1099s to every supplier that they buy anything from. Now, it used to be that you had to provide 1099s to any individual that you paid more than $800 if they weren't an employee. And the idea for that was a good one because you want to track what these people are making, because you have to tell the government what you're paying them so they can pay their taxes. But the reality is, in most cases, they don't enforce that anyway. Now they're going to, like all good governments, they're not enforcing half of what they have, and they're going to go pass more laws to make it more cumbersome, to make it almost impossible to be in small business, because now when you buy, if you're a restaurant, you buy your products from a supplier, you have to send them a 1099. If you buy your materials, your paper from Staples, you have to send them a 1099. It's going to be really, really, really cumbersome. I don't know what the penalties are exactly for if you fail to do something, but I assume, like most 1099s, if you don't send them out, an audit would disallow that expense, and you would then be responsible for higher taxation. So that's all I want to say today about current events, and I'm going to go to break right now. If you want to call in and talk about some of these issues, the number here at the station is 610-664-4100. You're listening to John Federico and Common Sense. This is John Federico, and you're listening to Common Sense. The number at the station again is 610-664-4100. Please call in with your comments and your suggestions. Before we went to break, we were speaking about the problem with mixing, I guess, how government encroaches on our freedoms, and the problem with mixing the private sector and government. And that really comes down to the biggest problem, is that government is a perverting influence. And when private industry bumps up against government, things are perverted, things are skewed, things are distorted. I guess distorted is a better way of looking at it. The banking industry was distorted not because of what they normally would have been allowed to do, but because of what they bought off in favors and were allowed to do by successive administrations. They have power and influence. And the way it works in this country right now, and I guess it's slowly gotten worse, it's gotten worse much faster recently, but it has slowly gotten worse, is you make money, you influence the government with your money to allow you to make more money, which then you use to influence the government even more to make more money. And that, in some sense, it's hard to prevent that entirely, but there are certain protections we should put in force so that these things can't get so far out of hand. I mean, this financial crisis should be laid at the feet of the two political parties of our country. Instead, you see the two political parties of our country, particularly the Democrats are in power now, talking and going after the private industry that did the bad things. And I think it's all kind of a big joke. They probably get together and have drinks afterwards, It's just for a show. It's a show to keep the American people distracted. Just like the two parties have become a show. There's no choice here. You have a Democrat, like the joke goes, what are you going to do, elect the third party guy? Because, first off, he can't get elected because you don't need a majority to win, and you're just going to destroy the guy you might want to win. And if he does get elected, he's got nobody to work with because you can't get a majority in the Congress this way. I mean, they got us where they want us. The question is, what are the people going to do about it? It concerns me. I'm sure it concerns a lot of people. Other people, it concerns them, and they say, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do because a lot of smart people in history have said, once it gets to the point where the government fully understands how easy it is to buy our votes with our own money, democracy's lost. And that's a concern. Obviously, I love our country, and I want to see it be healthy and vibrant. But I see us going in the wrong direction. I saw it for many years. I saw it under Bush, and I see it increasingly under Obama. We're going in the wrong direction. The government needs to be cut in half. I'd like to abolish the government, but that we need a government. So let's just say we need to cut them in half. Now, if you want to get really sick, and you're not sick already by what's going on, there was the great book I talked about on one of the previous programs called The Big Short. The Big Short's a wonderful book by Michael Lewis, and he talks about, just how this whole crisis got caught up in this crisis. Well, recently I had the advantage of coming across another book that's even more descriptive, and it talks about how government and banking got together to basically screw the American citizen, and it's called 13 Bankers. Under the guise that they're doing it all for your own good. I read an article in The Atlantic, and this is by the same author, back in summer of last year, and his name is Simon Johnson, and I hadn't heard much about him before or since, and then this book came out called 13 Bankers, and I haven't read the whole book yet. I just read basically the first chapter, but it's going to be a great read, and it goes into detail about how it happened before, how the banks pushed the ability to sell these derivatives through Congress or through got the administration to basically sign off on it. And they didn't. It implies that they didn't even do it so much because they gave political donations. They did it because they convinced the politician. And remember, the politician isn't the brightest guy in the room. The politician is just the guy who everyone's convinced is, I don't know what he's convinced of these days, but anyway, he's not the brightest guy in the room. Our president is not the sharpest tool in the shed. He convinces these guys who basically have an education where they kind of got through the system in law or whatever they studied. I mean, they were able to breeze through a system, talk for the rest of their lives, never really do anything, and then they get into power. And you have these bankers that come in, and these guys, they went to pretty good schools, a lot of these bankers, and they're pretty well educated, and they're pretty smart guys. And so these dumber guys that are our politicians, like the president and the congressman, they look to these guys as like some type of I don't know if I'm call it exactly that they worship them, but they basically worship them, and so they think that they know what they're doing. It's like kind of like, imagine you're in the room with Obama and you have Geithner and Bernanke. I don't think much of Geithner or Bernanke, but imagine who's doing the talking and who's doing the understanding. And you have Obama there trying to catch up, because he doesn't have an education in finance, trying to figure out what's going on, assuming he's a good guy and even cares. Okay, he doesn't. He's out of his league. So just like with the oil spill, he has no idea what's going on. So they're afraid. And the finance guys come in and say, you got to do this for the economy. Well, this didn't happen this actually didn't happen in the Obama administration, happened in the Clinton administration. Clinton's a guy that a lot of people look up to as being intelligent. I haven't seen, any outward proof of it necessarily, other than he's a hell of a good communicator. But regardless, it was during the Clinton administration that these bankers were able to start selling these derivatives to the level that they sold, to increasing level. And they sold the administration on the necessity through this innovation of advancing, American finance. And American finance is really, really, really important. Our country can't function without it. But we don't need half the crap that they sell to be able to function. We need fundamental financing. And yes, selling off packaged mortgages, it's a good idea if it's done properly. You have people that want to invest. They like to amortize their risk or spread their risk by basically lending to thousands of people instead of to one. It's kind of the way insurance companies work. If they insure one house, it's an awful risk. If they insure two houses, it's an awful risk. If they insure 5,000 houses, not too much of a risk, because what happens is the amount of premiums they come in would easily pay to rebuild 50 houses if they're or maybe not 50 houses, maybe 30 houses if they're taking premiums from 5,000 houses. That's the way it works, and they know through actuary tables how many houses are going to burn. Insurance companies have been incredibly profitable. In fact, they were some of our most profitable companies until the financing industry took over. But so what these guys are doing actually is in a form of insurance. By spreading the risk, they're having a safer return, because 1,000 homeowners, the odds of 1,000 homeowners defaulting should be a known quantity. So the idea of selling these packages is good. And the idea even of insuring the sale of these packages against default to a company that can afford to pay off in the event they actually default is also a clever and good idea. Not a real complicated idea. It's not a brain surgeon idea. They go make these guys out to be brain surgeons. It's not so difficult to figure these things out. I mean, sit in a room for a few minutes and figure it out on a spreadsheet. It doesn't take geniuses to figure this stuff out. though it certainly takes a bigger genius than most of our politicians are, but it doesn't take a genius. So not a bad idea. But then they let them sell, as you know, as we talked about, synthetic derivatives, which they allowed them to actually have people buy insurance on bonds going bad, but these people didn't own the bonds. And they sold it multiple times, causing much exposure to our financial system. Companies that did that should have been wiped off the face of the earth. Okay, instead, we bailed them out because they're the smart guys. We can't let them go under. Goodness sakes, what would happen if Goldman Sachs went under? The earth would end. No, they have a lot of power. They have a lot of influence. And they don't just have influence financially over the politician. They have influence over the mind of the politician. The mind of the politician is a malleable mind. Think about it. He has to first get elected. And he has to be a certain type of person to get elected. His mind needs to be open to all sorts of ideas and all sorts of perversions. Then he gets elected. Then once he's elected, he's got to stay in office because that's the sole function of a politician, really, is to aggrandize his own power. So he wants to stay in office as long as possible, beyond death if it were possible. So he has to really open his malleable mind up to all sorts of changes because he doesn't understand economics. That's not why he's there. He doesn't understand finance. That's not why he's there. He doesn't even understand administration. That's not why he's there. He's there because he was the guy that his party was able to convince people to vote for. Stupid people, I guess. We're the stupid people. We keep voting for these guys. I mean, you'd almost want to boycott the election, but you're always afraid that the worst guy is going to get in there if you boycott the election. Because really, there's nobody running that you would actually trust to run your own company. Nobody. Not one of them. Chris Dodd, you'd think you'd trust him with your money? Thank God the guy's retiring finally before he died. Actually, that's a novelty. A number of them, I guess they're facing uncertain re-elections, so they're going to actually retire. But the problem is we elect these guys. They're pretty stupid guys. But we say, well, this guy's not so stupid. He can be president. This guy's not so stupid. She can be the Speaker of the House. I mean, come on. This lady's, I don't know what she should be doing for a living, but she shouldn't be in Congress. So we elect these people and we allow the parties to tell us who to vote for. Or no, not tell us who to vote for. Give us this illusion of choice, this illusion that somehow we're making the selection. So anyway, so these guys aren't economists. They're not the top of the class. I mean, they keep telling you they're the top of the class, but then they won't release their grades. I mean, I don't care if they're top of the class or not. The guy that's top of my class was crazy when I was in school. So I don't know that I want him to be president either. Usually the brightest guys were quite crazy. And we all know who the bright guys were if you went to college or even to high school. They're not the guys that necessarily got A's. They're the guys that got A's while they were smoking pot. They're the guys that were crazy and they were really smart, and you're not going to hear from those guys unless they're in a lab somewhere. So I'm tired of hearing how smart these politicians are because either they're not so smart or they're not so ignorant or they're screwing us on purpose. So, you have to put it one way or the other. Either they know what they're doing and they're screwing you, or they don't know what they're doing and they're screwing you. Either way, you're getting screwed. The difference is knowing whether or not the guy's doing it on purpose. Now, is that really that important? I don't know. Maybe we should just get rid of them and start with a clean slate. How do we do that? That's what we're talking about on this program. How do we change our government? How do we change the way they're elected? Are you tired of it? Are you tired of it yet? I mean, are you tired of going to the polls and voting for these losers? Guys that you wouldn't even want to hang out with? Guys are stealing from you? If you live in the city of Philadelphia, you know what that's like. These guys are all crooks, and you keep electing them. So why do you do it? You do it because you're busy trying to make money with your own life, hoping that they won't pay too much attention to you, hoping that they won't take too many of your tax dollars, hoping maybe that they'll let you keep enough to pay for your family's education, maybe pay for your family's food and their budget, and maybe put some savings aside for when you get older. You're just hoping the politician leaves you alone. But they have their elections. They have their special elections. They have their primaries. It's all a big game. It's a big show. It's big entertainment. And that's why we keep getting the losers that we have that are running the country. Running the country, running the state, running the city, running your county. They're all a bunch of losers. I mean, who would want to work in a county position if you weren't a loser? Who would want to run for a county position? Really? I mean, good grief, unless you really have nothing better to do with your life. It's like guys that go to planning board meetings. I used to be a developer. I mean, who would attend a planning board meeting that's 2 miles from your house unless you have nothing better to do but complain? There are people like that, They should really televise all those things, and you can see how stupid everybody is that goes to the meetings. But anyway, so there you have it. You have a bunch of people taking advantage of your laziness because they know that you're too well, I shouldn't say you're lazy. You're not lazy. You're not lazy in the respect to your own life. But as far as being involved in politics, we're all lazy. We talk about it, but we don't want to get involved. Somebody else can do it. Somebody else can run for office. Some other idiot can get elected. He's not so bad. We can live with this for a few years. But over time, they encroach on your freedoms. Over time, they give you a really good, I can't say it because I think it's a bad word on this program, but you know what I'm saying. You're getting screwed, and you're getting screwed royally. And now it's come to the point where I think the people have to consider doing something about it. Something beyond solving it by voting in Republicans. Now, that's a good start. Not just Republicans. Throw out every single guy that voted for these stupid measures that you know in your heart are wrong. Healthcare, dumb. Yes, we all want health care. We all want free health care. Wouldn't it be great? Let's just run the hospitals for free. Guess what? You can't run them for free. Everything costs something. The difference is who's paying for it. Someone is always paying for it. And if you can't figure out who's paying for it, you're probably the one paying for it. Okay? It's not free. Talk to Brit and talk to people in England who have health care. Okay? Their economy's going in the toilet. It's been going there for years. Now we're going to follow them quickly. We've decided we like putting our economy in the toilet because it just gives the government so much control of our lives. And isn't that great to have stupid people running our lives for us? That's where it's headed. So if you like the results, if you like continuing to struggle and fight every time, if you like maybe getting a break once in a while by getting a guy like Reagan in for 8 years who maybe can turn the tide back a little bit, or Clinton who could fall asleep on the job and have done an okay job in the 90s because they were a great time to be alive, okay, great. You're going to keep getting people like that. You're going to keep wondering how these people get to the positions that they get to. But if you really want to get involved, think about ways of getting this government under control, getting this government out. The only thing I can think of, and I'm waiting for a better idea, is to create a situation where a third party can actually get in. Why a third? But third party means any other party. It doesn't mean there's actually a party. It means a candidate that isn't one of the major parties can run and win. And the only way that can happen is if we force it to be a majority election. In other words, I'm tired of senators can get in with 43% of the vote, or Clinton winning in 1992 by getting majorities in 2 states, or Bush getting in without getting even a plurality of the vote. I don't like that. It's not that I don't like Bush. I don't care about Bush. I could care less about Bush. I could care less about Obama. I care about the country. Okay, and these guys are not doing right by our country. The Republicans and the Democrats aren't. The Republican Party cares about one thing, the Republican Party. Okay? And in that measure, they should be glad John McCain didn't win. Because John McCain, while he's not as bad as Barack Obama, would have been a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. He was indecisive. He was centrist. He doesn't understand being in government so long that it's our country, not the government's country. And I'm tired of listening to their crap. Anyway, so I'm going to go to break. I haven't gotten a call here. If you'd like to add anything to the conversation, I appreciate it. If you want to call in here, the number at the station, I don't give frequently enough, is 610-664-4100. You've been listening to Common Sense with John Federico. Hello, this is John Federico, and you're listening to Common Sense. The number at the station here is 610-664-4100 if you want to call in with your comments, complaints, suggestions, questions, what have you. We were talking a minute ago about the distorting impact of government on our lives, distorting influence of government in everything that it touches and does. And a few weeks ago, we talked about immigration for almost the whole program, and the immigration situation is just one more product of why government is such a bad influence on what we do. You look at the problem we have in our country. They estimate somewhere between 10 and 14 million illegal immigrants living in the country. And what I advocated, or what I suggested before, is the reason why we have such a broken immigration policy is because our immigration policy, makes no sense. I was researching this online last night, actually, and I wanted to see how many actual work visas are given out legally. And the number I keep coming back to is somewhere around 66,000, something like that. So they're only giving out 60 plus 70,000 total work visas. And we have, 10 to 12 million people here illegal that don't have visas. So, perhaps, and again, I think my one guest that said build defense. Yes, build defense, for sure, build defense, protect our border, absolutely. But dealing rationally with the situation, you might want to make a law, lo and behold, government won't do it, I'm sure, but to actually allow people to come in illegally to work, not as citizens, but as visa holders, and move towards a more sensible law. Obviously, maybe we didn't need 10 to 14 million, but we certainly needed probably a couple million of those people, honestly needed them to sustain our economy at some point. So there weren't enough visas to do that. Once the law got broken and so many started coming here, maybe it was double, 3 times, 4 times the legal amount, it had a kind of one of these effects where now everybody's doing it, so nobody bothered with the legal system, which is probably I'm sure is much more difficult. Strangely, also, we give out a lot of student visas every year, and I understand some people that came to this country that are still here, that are here illegally, came on a student visa and just overstayed the student visa. And they remain in this country illegally once they stay. I think it's over 6 months or whatever the period is for their visa. I knew a girl a bunch of years ago that was going to Villanova University, and she had a master's. She was getting her master's at Villanova University, and the problem with the visa in that case was that you're at the mercy of the professor to keep signing off on your extending visa. And it seems like a good idea, but I remember they had incredible control over her. They made her work like crazy hours and all weekend because they had to do what she had to do basically for free to keep her visa going, because you're enslaved when you're here. And the way our law's set up, I understand that the employer basically is like, the king, and the employee is the slave. And if you do something wrong, they send you back. According to what I read last night, they send you back the same day. I think they incarcerate you, then send you back if you lose your employment, don't have other employment lined up with a verifiable employer that's gone through the process of getting a visa approved. So it's a very strange law, and you might, when you start looking into it, might research it if you get a chance. Look at our actual policy on giving visas. You might understand why so many people are here illegally. I'm not suggesting they should have come illegally or be allowed to stay illegally, but you might start to understand why it is people avoided the system, evaded the system, abused the system, and then they have. And both employer and employee have done this because the system was made impossible, and so they dealt with the impossible situation by avoiding it. And that's why we have the problem today. The problem today isn't that it is that we let so many people into the country illegally, but the bigger problem is we made a situation that was almost unenforceable. You have someone come in here as a student and they overstay their visa, and what's the penalty? I guess if they get caught, they send them back, but how often do they get caught? So I think the situation is to make a law that's more easy to follow in conjunction with enforcing our current law, which is to put the fence up, stop them from coming in and going out. Now, a lot of people that get here illegally or come in legally then stay past their visa, they never leave. They probably would like to leave and come back, but they can't because now they're illegal. So you've caused even a further problem on the situation. Anyway, so I looked at how government gets involved with these things, and people don't go back and try to draft anything sensible. Because remember, my first premise is that the people that that draft this legislation, I'm not saying the ones that draft it, probably the people that actually draft the legislation that write the words, they're probably pretty bright because they have to actually draft stuff that makes some sense. I mean, it makes some sense to the politician. It makes some sense that you can read and understand what it says, mostly. But the politician that votes in favor of the stuff, he doesn't even understand what he's doing. He doesn't understand the repercussions. He doesn't understand what's going to cause in the future. And that's what you have to think about when you draft legislation. Not today. When you draft legislation that lasts beyond today, you have to think about what type of effect that's going to have. I know when they were drafting the Constitution, that's all they thought about was the future and how the future was going to be shaped by the document that they were drafting. I don't know when they drafted healthcare if they thought about that. I know with the banking bill, it's going to probably create a lot of cronyism. It's giving a lot of power to the federal government, which I think we should be a regulator, certainly, of finance. But when you give too much power, you're just going to be able to up your political donations if you're the one wielding it, and that's what I fear most. I think it should be quite clear for everyone to know who's breaking laws, and the way to do that is to make the law simple. Very, very simple, so that you don't have a lot of discretion. That's what happens. What I understand from the bill is that they're giving a lot of discretion to the oversight people. It's kind of like I said years ago in New Jersey where the speed limit was 55 miles an hour and no one's obeying the law. Okay, it's a little different. Maybe it's a poor analogy, but you're giving all the discretion on when they should enforce the law to the police officer. Now, hopefully he's not a corrupt individual, but if he were, he decides if he enforces 70 or lets 70 go, and it all might depend on how you look. or what type of car you're driving or anything else. So it's easier if you make a law that's easy, that everyone knows if you're braking. If it's 70 and they pull everybody over that's going over 70 and they give them all tickets and they're mandated to give them tickets, then you have a real law. And you get to understand whether that law is popular or not by people getting upset because they're getting ticketed. If you let most people go and only ticket some of them, kind of like our tax system is getting these days, people aren't going to object too much to it because, well, they're going to get the other guy. They won't get me, and so it goes on like that, and it just gives more power to the government official, whoever he is, whether he's a police officer, whether he's some guy on some rig out in the Gulf of Mexico that is given the power, and he's gone to dinner 13 times this year because the oil companies, bought him dinner, sent him tickets to the ball games, and did whatever else for him. And he's got so much discretion he can sign off on and waivers. And instead of having a process where it's clear, post what or publish in some way what they even sign off on. The problem, as I say, never surprises me what the private individual will do. The private individual sometimes will pollute the environment for his own gain, thinking, well, I'm doing it, but it's just me. The private individual, will do something untoward in finance because he thinks I'll get away with it and make more money. So if the government has any responsibility at all, is to adopt laws that are sensible, that are clear, and that are easy to enforce. And more importantly, that it's known to everybody when they're not obeying that law. And I think as we get towards this banking bill, and we have the health care bill, and we have all these other bills coming forward, no one has a clue what's in most of these things. Even the guys drafting them, they draft part of one bill. I said they might be bright sometimes, but 2,700 pages, no single individual wrote that bill. I don't know how many weeks or months it would take to write 2,700 pages, but it might be the entire length of the administration to do something like that. So I think what the banking bill is going to do is create a cozy relationship between the financial sector and the government, even more cozy than the one they have already, and that's what I fear about it. It should be pretty simple to say you can't do that, you can't do this under any situation. These are things we allow you to do as a bank. These are the reserve requirements you have to lend. These are the guidelines when you're going to sell your loan to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had actually very, very sensible guidelines for years and years and years. And they originally public. Then they sold shares. I think it was sometime in the early 70s, and they became private, but they kind of had this quasi backing from the federal government. And then later, of course, they started to drop their restrictions on lending, initially influenced by the administration officials at the time and by people in the industry, and they wanted to grow their portfolios, and they cut those things down. It would be very easy to make sensible guidelines using historical data on what a person should need to do to borrow money, what they should be able to do to borrow money to buy a house, what income they should have, how long they should maybe have to be in at that position. Maybe they can get a little break on the amount of down money if they've been in a position a certain period of time. Very simple rules, and you give loans out based on those rules, and everybody plays by the same rules, and that's it. Then you only have to hope that your appraisers are doing their job. And below a certain amount of money down, maybe should require a second appraisal. And the appraiser should be held accountable for the appraisal that he makes. I don't know how exactly you do that, but certainly there probably are ways you can do it, and guys in the industry could think about those things. They're the kind of sensible rules we could consider adopting. But as it is, I don't expect a lot of progress in those areas because the future legislation is not being influenced by sensible people. It's being influenced by people. They're trying to convince you that you should reelect them, and they're going to do something grand to help get reelected. They're going to change the world for you so that you can reelect them. And the world that I see that would be best for all of us is an extremely limited government with very clear rules for the rest of us. And we elect people that get turned over regularly, and those guys only think about the best interest of the entire American people, not just the individual who's giving them the money. So that's kind of been the focus today. If you'd like to call in here to Common Sense, we take your calls at 610-664-4100. It's been kind of quiet this morning at 8:60 a.m. here. You're listening to Common Sense, so please call in if you have the opportunity. We're coming up actually to the end of the broadcast shortly, so if you are going to call in soon. Our focus today has been on, I guess, my frustration with the nauseating choices that we are given, year after year to vote, both in primaries and in general elections, to put real despicable individuals into office to run our country, to run our city, to run our counties, to run our state, and trying to find ways that we can change the process so that we have better choices, change the process so that maybe the reward is only for a job well done. And that job well done is known, instead of a job where he does a crappy job and then advertises that what a wonderful job he has done. We should have a situation where the government doesn't have so much power. So while we're not going to always get the best candidates, and we're not going to always get the best politician, if the government had as much power as it had, in the 1830s, its effect on the individual wasn't so great. It didn't really matter, so much who got elected. Today, it's just so important, because today, unlike times past, our government is so strong, so powerful, so influential over our lives that we can't just let the system keep going the way it is. We can't let it keep yielding the results that it yields year after year. These guys are just bad guys. They're just talentless individuals that run on murky deeds and somehow get us to reelect them year after year. And I'm sick about it, and I'd like to find a way of changing the situation so that you don't hear nauseated talk show hosts going on and whining about how bad things are. Maybe we can talk about ways of improving. It's very hard to talk about ways of improving our country if we don't change the system somehow that elects people that are so completely without talent, without ability. Making a speech is not ability. Understanding how to run a country and understanding the repercussions of what you pass today. That's the kind of person we want to run the country and to run the Congress and to run even the cities and the state. Someone who cares, someone who thinks about the citizen, thinks about the best way of making all of our lives better. So anyway, we're wrapping up the program for today. We're going to be going to our final break. You've been listening to Common Sense with John Federico as we search for solutions to maybe thinking about a way of changing our system. So I'll be on Wednesday and Thursday this week as well. So please call in if you have the time between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. The number here again is 610-664-4100. This is Common Sense. And think about it every night maybe. Call in tomorrow if you have any ideas how we might better move forward. Thank you for listening.
We built this city on rock and roll. Built this city. We built this city on rock and roll. Someone always playing corporation games. Who cares? They're always changing. Corporation names. We just want to dance here. Someone stole the stage. They call us irresponsible. Write a song.
Homeowners, now is the season to be thinking about your roof, because all it takes is one storm to turn a small roof problem into a major leak. If it's time for a new roof, call Sears at 1-866-999-9371. You can save $500 if you call right now. Sears licensed, fully insured contractors can get your roofing job done right. Just call 1-866-999-9371. Sears has a variety of shingles and styles that are built for long-lasting performance. And you'll save $500 if you call now. So call Sears for a free in-home consultation, 1-866-999-9371. Sears, life well spent. Offer ends June 30th. Not available in all areas. Installation provided by Sears authorized licensed contractors. License information available upon request. That's Sears Roofing. Call right now and save $500. Call 1-866-999-9371. 1-866-999-9371.